In this screencast, I plan on talking about the properties and changes that can happen to matter. Things like when you have a chemical or physical change, or chemical and physical properties, as well as intensive or extensive properties. All right, so we can either be a physical property or a chemical property, and these are characteristics that are measured. In a physical property, you have, excuse me, you can measure it without changing the overall substance. So you can measure how easily something melts. And you might have started with solid ice cream, but now you have liquid ice cream. It's still made of those chemicals, those elements put together. It's not any different. You can have an ice cube or you can have liquid, but at what temperature it melts or it freezes is the property. And another one that's really hard to recognize for a lot of people is dissolving. And when you dissolve something, that is a physical property. We can determine how well something dissolves. Like if you put salt into water, it dissolves really quickly. But if you put oil into water, it does not dissolve at all. In fact, it stays as two separate layers. You can have a chemical property, such as something, how well it burns. You could measure the combustibility of household things. Like you could see how well paper burns or how well plastic burns, and they all have different abilities to burn. And when you do burn something, it is no longer the original substance. You have changed the makeup of the matter. So it has different elements in it. They're in a different order, they're in a different combination or compounds. This bottom one is rusting. And when you rust something, it is no longer, for instance, iron. It has now become iron oxide and has broken down, and it is not as valuable to people who want to have strong tools or strong machines. They don't want to have the rust because the iron oxide, the rust, is not good for the particular properties that they're trying to use. When you do a property, you are measuring how well that change can occur. So just like with a physical or a chemical property, you can have a physical or a chemical change. And this is where the matter will go through some kind of change, and you're going to decide if it has remained the same or if it has changed in its composition or its makeup. So in a physical change, you can still retrieve the original substance. For instance, this can is being crushed, and it is still the same. It has not changed its chemical composition. It's still made of aluminum. It was aluminum before, and it's still aluminum after. So it is just a physical change. In this image, we have a chemical change. We have a liquid here, which I'm going to guess is probably some kind of acid like vinegar. And then we have chalk, and when you put them together, you get this bubbling, fizzy stuff, and it is no longer chalk and vinegar. And you can see if you look into the bottom of this test tube, the chalk is reacting, causing this gas to escape, and we have a different liquid, and this is how the substance is no longer the same, and we can't reverse it. So it is now different. Right? So in a physical change, it is still the original composition. In this case here, this is paper, and we ripped it. That was a physical change. And here the paper is on fire, and when it's done, it would be a pile of ash and gases that are released. It is no longer paper. So the difference is the matter after the change has occurred. Is the matter chemically the same, or is it something totally new? All right, the last type of properties that we're going to look at are the differences between intensive properties and extensive properties. And in intensive properties, this is where it does not matter how much you have. So the amount doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. When we are measuring the color of a sample, it doesn't it it doesn't matter if you have 2 grams of it or if you have 200 grams. When you're measuring the melting point, you melt some of it. If you have a metal, let's say we melt it, it wouldn't matter if we had a little bit or a whole bunch. It's still going to have the same melting point. Now, extensive, on the other hand, extensive does matter. So the sample size matters in extensive. For instance, the length. If you have a long cord, it's maybe 10 centimeters. And if you have a foot of cord, that's 12 inches. That's 22 centimeters. That is an extensive property. The amount of the substance present makes a difference in that type of property. So you have some good examples here in these two graphics showing you some of the different intensive properties and then some of the extensive properties. And what you need to keep in mind is if how much you have in the sample that you're measuring changes the overall measurement, that's an extensive property. And if how much you have doesn't change it, then that's intensive.